that, Jill Langley has won a landmark court case against her father's wife after she was left out of his will.
Yeah, the will had been written just 2 months before Robert's passing at the age of 94, where he left his entire fortune to his new wife of 11 months, Chelsea, who was 39 years his junior.
The judge in the case ruled that the will was invalid and that his wife, Chelsea, had exerted undue influence and control over him. Jill joins us now to explain her story alongside her solicitor, Caoimhe. Good morning,
Morning to both of you.
Good morning. So, Jill, your husband died... your father died in 2020.
Yes, that's correct. He died in May 2020.
Tell us a little bit about your relationship.
Yes, I was an only child. I grew up in Billericay in Essex.
Yeah.
I had a happy childhood. My father had a chain of butcher shops. He started off with the mobile butcher shops when I was a baby, and it gradually progressed. And I was loved, and I loved my parents. When I left school, I actually got myself a job in the city, but I gave it up to help my father. I had no brothers and sisters. I was the only one. So I went to work in the butcher shops, packing meat, doing all the menial tasks. And then I gradually took over shops and increased their takings, freezer centres, increased the takings enormously. I worked very hard for Dad, out of love, got paid very little, but I didn't mind because I did it out of love. And over the years, of course, the supermarkets came along and the butchers became really not functional anymore. So during that period, we lived on a farm in Billericay and we came to live in Norwich. I had a cousin and we came to live in Norwich and I led my father into new businesses.
Right.
We had a nightclub and then we had a leather jacket business, which was very successful in the 80s. Of course, leather was very fashionable and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And so, yes, I always got on very well with my father and my mother. I loved them dearly.
So you worked very closely with him and you clearly got an entrepreneurial spirit. The two of you helped create what was a very successful business.
Yes.
Your relationship with your father did deteriorate once your mum got ill and then she sadly passed away, didn't it?
Yes. My dad was, I suppose, of the generation who he didn't have any money when he was younger. He was told he would not amount to anything. So I think that generation... he didn't like spending money. And really, Mum was diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's in 2012. Right. And, of course, as her illness progressed, I went to look after them. I used to go and do all the housework, the washing, the ironing, and just generally, because they lived in a very big house at Wirral, which was way too much for Mum. She couldn't do anything. Yeah. So I was going to look after them. But as her illness progressed, he was told that she needed to go into a care home, which she did, bless her. But sadly, he wouldn't pay. Right. He thought he could have odd carers in. I put lots of suggestions to him how we could have a better life for Mum. But no, he didn't want that. He wanted her at home. But sadly, that's why we're here today. She should have really gone into a nursing home.
But that, sorry, Kath, that friction between you and your father over the treatment and what was the best care for your mum led to the breakdown of your relationship with your father, so you suddenly weren't communicating, were you? Yes,
well, by 2015, I'd suggested lots and lots of things that would make a better life for them, moving back, because they lived at Wirral at the time, which was about 5 miles from Downham Market. And I suggested they move back near me because Dad lost his licence, I'd be near to me. But no, sadly, he wanted to go to Kings Lynn, which was about 45 minutes away from me. So it wasn't like something I could just pop in. Yeah. And, of course, it broke down a little bit because I was suggesting things to help, but he was going the other way and making things worse. He was getting to a great age and he wasn't thinking correctly. Right. So his vision was muddled.
And then that relationship really did start to deteriorate when he met his wife.
Yes, I mean, everything I tried on my part, he was getting angry. He'd gone back in time. He started accusing me of things I hadn't done, and he was accusing neighbours and people he'd come into contact with of stealing things, which, of course, is a symptom of dementia and Alzheimer's. Although he wasn't diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, he wasn't getting blood to the brain.
Right.
So, of course, his thinking pattern was not as it should be.
So when did you find out? So your relationship with your father's broken down. You're not communicating for, as you pointed out, the reasons you've said. When did you find out he'd remarried?
I didn't find out he'd remarried until March, early March 2020, just before we went into lockdown. I had a letter come through my door. It was a little bit difficult to understand. By the way, just to let you know, your dad got married last year. He was actually married in June 2019. It was a wedding that I wasn't informed of and didn't know about. So we could call it a secret wedding.
Because I think that his wife said that they did try to invite you to both the wedding and the funeral.
No, that is not correct.
OK. Also, there's the suggestion that he was trying to write you out of the will before he met her as well.
No, he wasn't trying. He made a new will in 2012, which I was always the beneficiary. But you see, he was such a great age. He wasn't well. He wasn't thinking correctly. Mm-hmm. So his whole thinking process was muddled, and I could see the mistakes. I worked so closely with Dad that I knew his thought process,
Sure.
and I could see the mistakes that were being made. But sadly, he wouldn't take my advice.
So were you completely cut out of the will?
When I received a copy of the will, yes, I was. The will was left to Chelsea.
Who's his wife?
Yes,
yep.
And her son.
OK. And what did you do then? What was your next step?
I was quite shocked because I knew Dad inside out, and my thought process, this is not Dad. He'd got family, he'd got myself, 2 grandsons, he'd got a niece who lives in London, he'd got a nephew who lives in Norwich who'd helped him greatly in years. So we had got family, we'd all helped him.
Was he still in touch with all of them?
Yes, Christopher, his nephew, had helped him before he moved to Kingsley, and he used to go several times a week and help with his camper van and do jobs for him.
So they were still in touch?
Yes, I think once he moved to King's Lynn, because he wasn't well and it was as if he'd cut everybody off. Yeah. Not from our choice, but, but from his choice.
So
really.
what made you decide to contest the will then?
Well, because of all the work, you see, the estate, yes, it was in Dad's name, but it was a family business and I'd worked so hard. Really, really hard. I mean, I'd been out on markets in the snow at 3 a.m. in the morning. I'd humped frozen food boxes around. I'd up takings. I'd contributed so much to this estate for next to nothing. My pay was £30 a week, and yet I was taking thousands. I was organising fashion shows, and he bought and sold old halls. So I used to be out there with a workman with a wheelbarrow with bricks in it, helping my hands, my husband said, were like sandpaper because of all the hard work I did. Mm-hmm. So for my part, the new wife hadn't lifted a finger.
It was nearly £1 million as well that he left, which is significant.
Yes, we'd worked hard for that.
Yeah.
So, Caoimhe, explain a little bit about what happens in this sort of scenario, because the ruling in this is quite a landmark case, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's really important because, as far as we're aware, roughly at least, we've not seen a case with these facts that has been successful so far.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for lawyers going forward to use it as guidance and a precedent, and for members of the public as well to gain some confidence to bring a case if they have similar circumstances within their family.
So can you tell us in simple terms exactly what the judge ruled?
Yeah, so the judge found that there was undue influence by the defendant and that there was a real lack of testamentary capacity. He shouldn't have been able, Jill's father that is, to write the will, and it was invalid. It didn't stand.
How did that feel, Jill, when you got that outcome?
Yes, for me it was the truth. Because I knew when my father went to make this will, they have what they call the will files. And he was asked to go into the solicitors twice, which my previous solicitor got a copy of. And as soon as I read it, I knew he can't remember his life. He said we'd lived in Southend. We never lived in Southend. We lived in Billericay. He said he was an army major. He was only in the war for the last year of the war because of his age. You weren't allowed to join till you were 18 then. So I knew straight away, Dad, you can't remember your life. So he should never have been allowed to have made that will. And I feel that the solicitors made a huge mistake. He should have there were red flags that were not noticed.
We have a right reply from his wife's legal team. The marriage between our client and the late Mr Harrington was one built on love and affection. Our client strongly denies any baseless accusations from the estranged daughter of Mr Harrington. The court did not find that the marriage was predatory, and we will strongly deny all such accusations. What do you make of that?
I think it's sad, because I think, you know, we went, for an ordinary person like myself, which I am, to take this to the High Court. It was the truth. I told the truth because it was my life, my father's life, and the truth always wins. And I wanted, not for myself, but for other people to be aware that, unfortunately, we have an ageing population. They are sitting on properties that are all paid for, that generation. They have assets, and unfortunately, there is the culture today that they are vulnerable.
Yeah. And
they're often lonely. So, of course, if people befriend them, they think it's great, but they don't really know who they are.
So, Caoimhe, if there's people watching at home today whose family members may be, as Jill just described, vulnerable, and they have assets that would make them sort of attractive to somebody who doesn't necessarily have the best of intentions, what can they do to try and protect them?
Well, I think it's definitely... You're definitely more successful preventing a marriage than you are doing anything about it if they do marry. So it is just about recognising those red flags and keeping an eye on your family members that are vulnerable for various reasons, and just try and stop it before it happens in the first place. And if it does happen, seek legal advice, because, as we've seen, the cases are difficult but can be successful.
Yeah. OK, well, thank you so much for joining us this morning, ladies. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you very much indeed.
Oh, hello. Thank you for visiting our This Morning YouTube channel. We upload tons of new content every single day. So hit the subscribe button, like all the videos, and don't miss out. We'll see you in the morning.